Now live to the National Press Club, where the NPC's Newsmakers series is taking place. Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer is there to deliver a speech on the House Democrats' vision for Congress.
First as House Minority Whip, then as the House Majority Leader from 2007 to 2011, and since then as the Minority Whip. As the Democratic Whip, he is the second-ranking member of the House Democratic leadership and is charged with mobilizing the party vote on important legislation, shaping the House Democrats' priorities, and delivering the Democratic message. Thank you, Congressman Hoyer, for coming to the National Press Club. I'm pleased to yield the floor to you, and I look forward to your yielding it back to me for the question and answer session after your remarks.
At some time in the not-too-distant future.
Right, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be at the Press Club, a distinguished group of journalists and friends, and I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. I also want to say that the President and I, Myron Belkind, had an opportunity to discuss this coming weekend's activities, when Maryland will play Ohio State, from which he graduated and was chairman of their newspaper, The Lantern. So I'm very pleased to be here today. Hopefully I'll be pleased on Sunday.
Yes.
In 5 short weeks, the American people will make a decision about the direction that they want this country to go. They're going to have to choose what kind of government they want. One characterized by endless gridlock, or one that achieves progress. A government on their side, or one that tells them you're on your own. Congress, many Americans feel, with justification, isn't on their side anymore. Across the country, people are losing faith that Congress will or can meet its responsibility to support and grow a strong middle class. Congress, of course, has not always been this dysfunctional. With a responsible majority, and with members coming together with a seriousness of purpose, Congress can do a great deal of good. In the 1950s, Democrats and Republicans worked together to invest in an interstate highway system that spurred unprecedented economic growth. As part of President Johnson's Great Society, Congress passed the Higher Education Act so millions could afford the college education of which their parents and grandparents could only dream. Compromise and cooperation led to the enactment of Social Security in 1935 and Medicare and Medicaid in 1965. It brought us the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act 50 years ago. In 1990, Congress came together to pass the Disabilities Act to open the doors of opportunity to millions. In 1997, the parties worked together to lay the groundwork for a bill that balanced the federal budget and created unprecedented surpluses. Bipartisan compromise to achieve progress is no myth. It's happened. It worked. It can work once more. The American people can have a Congress that places productive policymaking ahead of partisan politics. One that tells the middle class, we're on your side. As voters prepare to elect the next Congress, they have a clear choice. Maintain a Republican House majority that has made obstruction and partisanship its policy. Or elect a Democratic majority that will end the gridlock by focusing on the issues that matter and by working in a bipartisan way to make progress. We've done that. We will do it again. And we need to make progress. According to a Gallup poll this month, 4 in 10 Americans believe it doesn't matter which party leads Congress. But in fact, it matters a great deal. Voters should be deeply concerned about continuing the Republican House majority for 2 reasons, at least. First, Republicans have ignored the will of the people by refusing to address the issues that Americans care about. Secondly, they have overseen the least productive and most closed Congress in modern history. In doing both, they have directly contradicted the pledges that they made. In their book, Young Guns, Eric Cantor, Kevin McCarthy, And Paul Ryan wrote, and I quote, "We pledge to stand on principle, to lead adults, and most of all, to serve as responsible stewards of the public trust by listening to the American people." And when Speaker Boehner assumed the gavel, he declared, and again I quote, "Above all else, we will welcome the battles of ideas, encourage it, and engage in it openly, honestly, and respectfully. As the chamber closest to the people, the House works best when it's allowed to work its will." When it is allowed to work its will. How much better off we would be had the House been allowed to work its will. Under Republican control, the House of Representatives has not lived up to its title. 71% of Americans want to increase the minimum wage, and 61% of small businesses support an increase to $10.10 an hour. That's according to a July poll. House Republicans, however, won't allow it to come to the floor. More than 7 in 10 Americans support comprehensive immigration reform, as surveyed in May. And a poll in June showed that a majority of Republican voters want a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants if they meet certain conditions. But instead of listening to the American people, Republicans refuse to allow the House to even hold a vote. When women asked for legislation to ensure equal pay for equal work, Republicans said, "You're on your own." On one important issue after another, House Republicans who refused to allow the people's will to be considered on the House floor. On September 18th, Speaker Boehner delivered a speech in which he said, and I quote, "Today, I can report that the People's House is more open and transparent. You can even bring your iPad to the floor." That may be the case, but you can't bring a bill to raise the minimum wage to the floor. You can't bring a bill to raise and institute unemployment insurance's continuation. You can't bring a bill to the floor to extend the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act. Dave Camp, Republican committee chairman, can't even bring his tax reform bill to the floor. Of course, you can bring your iPad, so you can read about those bills. You simply cannot consider them on the floor of the House of Representatives. As a result of the Republican majority walking away again and again, Congress is now less productive and more divided than ever. Under the Republican House majority in the 113th Congress, just 165 laws, the fewest in modern history, have been enacted, and only 26 of those were major pieces of legislation. Compare that in a similar situation when George Bush was President of the United States in 2007 and 2008, and the Democrats led the Congress. 460 bills were enacted to make America better, to serve the American people. And we're on target this year to be in session for 107 days only. Theirs has truly earned the title of Congress. The American people deserve a do-something Congress. In fact, they deserve a do-the-right-thing Congress, which is exactly what House Democrats are ready to do by working across the aisle to achieve results. And we know it is possible because we've done it. There have been a number of moments over the past 4 years when Speaker Boehner, frustrated with the obstructionists in his conference, turned to Democrats to pass key legislation. We supplied the votes to keep the government open and to reopen it after last October's shutdown. We pushed the Budget Control Act over the finish line to avoid defaulting on our debt. And after Hurricane Sandy, devastated families, farms, and small businesses. And 179 Republicans, 77% of their conference, walked away from the victims of Sandy and said, "You're on your own." But 192 Democrats voted for the disaster relief package, which is the only reason it passed. The same holds true for the Violence Against Women Act, patent reform, the highway bill, and the farm bill. And when President Bush was in office, Democrats worked across the aisle to pass a new GI bill, a bill to increase our energy independence, and legislation to prevent another Great Depression. Today, we see a Republican majority, however, that automatically opposes anything President Obama presents, even though our country needs action. Atlas Shrugged, the Ayn Rand novel that Paul Ryan often cites as inspiration for the ideology he and other here, says this about Congress. Again, Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand, quote, "There are two sides to every issue. One is right and one is wrong. But the middle is always evil." But the middle is always evil. Compromise is not evil. It is the necessary and noble pursuit of those who govern responsibly in a democracy. We listen to one another. We come to an agreement. The American people aren't looking for leaders who refuse to compromise or for more partisan division. What they seek are leaders who will make the tough choices that come with governing. They want us to do it in a bipartisan way, which demands compromise, not evil. It isn't hard to imagine what the result would be if that were the case. According to a study by Moody's Analytics in 2011, had the Republican majority worked with Democrats that year to pass the president's jobs plan, the GDP would have grown by as much as 2%, and 1.9 million jobs would have been created. Sadly, they didn't, and it was a missed opportunity and a real shame. Even without help from Congress, the president has achieved significant progress over the past 4 years in tackling the challenges that face us. As he pointed out in a speech on Saturday, by nearly every indicator, our country is doing better today than it was when President Obama took office. 10 million new jobs have been created in just over 4 years. $800 billion in Medicare costs saved. The number of children in poverty dropped by 1.4 million last year, representing the most significant decline since 1966. Think about how much more progress could be made were Congress a partner with the president and not an obstacle. Instead of a Congress where a Republican majority walks away and says, as I've said, "You're on your own," a Congress led by Democrats would reassure Americans that it is on their side. Our platform for a Democratic majority in 2015 is centered on taking action to jumpstart the middle class, to expand the middle class rather than seeing it shrink, to restore faith in the promise that if you work hard and take responsibility, you can access opportunities such as home ownership, higher education, and a secure retirement. The way to achieve that is for Congress to enact precisely what Republicans promised in 2010 but failed to deliver. And that is to quote their pledge, and I quote again, "a plan to create jobs, end economic uncertainty, and make America more competitive." Rather, the Republicans have created more uncertainty rather than ending it. No certainty for doctors treating Medicare patients that they will be paid adequately and continue to see those patients. Democrats have proposed giving doctors and seniors that certainty. No certainty for states and localities seeking to build and maintain bridges and highways, while Democrats have supported a long-term plan to invest in our infrastructure. No certainty for small businesses looking to create jobs through exporting. Democrats want to provide that certainty with a long-term reorganization of the Export-Import Bank. And no certainty for businesses looking to innovate or hire workers but coming up against a broken immigration system. Democrats want to fix that system through comprehensive reform that keeps talented graduates here, not send them home, and enables employers to hire both the permanent and temporary workers they need. There's a consensus in the American people about that issue. The list goes on, of course, but not brought to the floor. House Democrats would work to provide certainty in these ways and by making our economy more competitive through our Make It in America plan. In addition, we would work to jumpstart the middle class by raising the minimum wage, expanding access to education, helping student loan borrowers refinance, ensuring that women receive equal pay for equal work, and making sure affordable child care is available to those who need it. Doing these things isn't giving Americans a handout, but a leg up. That's how we jumpstart a strong middle class and build a stronger national economy. And it's what our people want their Congress to focus on, not partisan games, not an obsession with repealing the Affordable Care Act, not politically driven lawsuits against the president or threats of shutdown or default, not massive tax breaks that would explode our deficits and debt by hundreds of billions of dollars. Americans want a bipartisan effort to achieve results for the middle class, not a Congress that stands in the way. That's what Democrats are campaigning for, a Congress in which America's voices are heard. While Republicans continue to ignore the need to invest in job creation, we will move forward with Make It in America bills to expand manufacturing, increase employment, and open doors of opportunity. While Republicans block comprehensive immigration reform, we believe it should be passed and signed into law. The Chamber of Commerce agrees with that. The AFL-CIO agrees with that. Growers agree with that. Farm workers agree with that. Faith community agrees with that. Unfortunately, it hasn't come to the floor. While Republicans allow discriminatory efforts to keep minorities, seniors, and students from exercising their equal right to vote, we will work to restore the Voting Rights Act and protect and facilitate the ability of every American to cast their vote and have it counted. While Republicans try to rescind patient protections and critical benefits, we will protect affordable health care for all Americans, including every woman's access to the full range of health care choices. While Republicans add billions to the deficit with unpaid tax cuts, we will work in a bipartisan way to achieve fiscal sustainability and restore certainty, with no threats of shutdown and no threats of default. We must make sure that Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other critical programs will be there for our children and grandchildren when they need it. While Republicans spent $3 million of taxpayers' dollars defending the unconstitutional Defense of Marriage Act, we will work to prohibit employment discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. While Republicans have worked to undermine clean air and for future generations, we will support the development and deployment of clean energy and manufacturing technologies. And we will, as we have stood by in the past, we will stand by our veterans and maintain a strong national defense that can meet the challenges we face from terror groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIL, from Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons, and from the destabilizing actions of Vladimir Putin's Russia. America deserves a House majority that believes in a government that works, not one that believes government can do no good and should simply disappear. We know Congress can affect positive change because it's been done before. Over the past 4 years, though, the House of Representatives has essentially created a government that is missing in action. It took 198 Democrats and 87 Republicans coming together to vote to end the shutdown of our government last October. An astounding 144 Republicans voted to keep the government of the people of the United States of America shut down. I know what they thought about it, and I fear what people around the world thought about that. It will take Democrats, independents, and Republicans who are tired of gridlock to come together in a vote 5 weeks from tomorrow to end the 4-year shutdown of their Congress. This shutdown of Congress has been undertaken by a Republican majority in the House and by a Republican minority in the Senate that uses its rules to obstruct and filibuster. The past 4 years have been proof that elections matter. America's stockholders, our voters, surely know they need new leadership on their board of directors, which we call the Congress. America's challenges demand a serious majority that won't tell the middle class you're on your own, but that reassures them we're on your side. One that reminds them of the good Congress can do when it takes responsibility and translates the will of the people into meaningful progress. In Young Guns, now Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy said that voters should hold his party accountable. And he said this: should we regain the American people's trust, we will insist that our feet are held to the fire. If given the opportunity to govern, we will deliver on our commitment. If we don't, I'm confident the American people will send us packing. Demonstrably, the Republicans have not delivered on their commitment. In a Gallup tracking poll last month, 59% of the American people polled said they disapproved of Congress. They disapproved of Congress's performance because it isn't working for those it represents. Time to send them packing. On November 4th, the American people will have an opportunity to heed Mr. McCarthy's advice and take their Congress back. In order for that to happen, the majority of Americans who have been silenced in this Congress must speak loudly in the election. They must speak with the multitude of their votes and elect a Democratic majority in the House of Representatives that will permit the House to work its will, to listen to the American people, to act on their behalf. They must choose a leadership that truly serves the will of the American people and is committed to building a future of opportunity, security, and certainty. Certainty for our economy, certainty for our middle class, and certainty that the people's house will always be on the people's side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hoyer. And if you could just stay here, I'll try to moderate based on the ground rules that I laid out. If I could just use a presidential prerogative, just ask one question to maybe set the scene. But every election watcher in Washington, or nearly every election watcher, expects Democrats to lose House seats this November. Why do you think that is?
I think the context of this election is a difficult one historically. It's the 6th year of a presidential term. People look at this and historically say Democrats are on the downside of history. However, I've been around the country. I've been to 83 districts in which we're having contested elections. And in my view, we have an extraordinarily able group of candidates. I think our message is one that the American people support. The irony is, in poll after poll after poll, the people respond largely in agreement with the Democratic agenda that I've laid out. In that case, if I think they analyze it as I have argued they should, they will in fact vote to put Democrats in charge of the House of Representatives.
Yes, sir. And remember, identify yourself and your media organization and keep your questions brief. Thank you.
He's at the end of the table.
Is he? Yes. And Ruth will take the microphone around so that you can all hear it.
Thanks.
Since we have such a large turnout over these rooms.
Chad Pergram from Fox News. My question, you alluded to ISIL here. What do you think would be the parameters for possibly calling the Congress back? Speaker Boehner yesterday on ABC was pretty clear about saying that we might have to have American boots on the ground, and thought that the president might have been too trite in his remarks there. Do you think that that is a realistic possibility? And what's the conflict inside with Democrats who say, yeah, we need an authorization, no, we don't?
I think that the fact is that this matter will be considered in the lame duck. Whether it will be passed in the lame duck, I don't know. But I think it is incumbent upon the Congress of the United States to reconsider, based upon present facts, present challenges, present threats, the authorization for the use of military force passed in 2001 and 2002. I do not believe it's either necessary nor do I believe it will happen that we will come back before the lame duck, but it is my expectation we will start debate on, given the circumstances that exist today.
And what about those schisms in the caucus, the Democrats?
I think there are not a lot of schisms in the caucus. We had some very thoughtful debate. You saw the vote on the train and equip. The party was divided. The Republican Party was divided. I thought that was one of the more thoughtful debates that we've had during the course of the last 2 years, in which, in fact, the House did work its will and, in fact, did listen to the American people. And to that extent, it was unlike the balance of the session. But I think the party divided there was no acrimonious debate within our caucus. There was thoughtful discussion. And I think there is a large majority who believes that we need to consider this question carefully, thoughtfully, and appropriately in a timely fashion.
Bob Wiener, club member and freelance op-eds. Steny, you've made the point about jobs, that there would be over 1 million jobs and 1% additional on the unemployment rate, and yet the message stays, and the policy has stayed for the last decade, of rich tax breaks as the way to create jobs, even though CRS and others say 5-to-1 jobs create jobs. Why is that the case, that that message has stuck for rich tax breaks? And also, why are there 50 million fewer voters in the off-year elections than there are in the presidential election, and aren't those actually your voters?
Well, you've asked two questions. First of all, why is it that we pass tax breaks for the wealthiest in America, and tax breaks that do not necessarily grow jobs? Frankly, we didn't do that in 2007 through 2011 when we were in charge of the Congress of the United States. The Republicans have done that, frankly, all the time that I've been in the Congress of the United States. I came in 1981. The result, most dramatically, in 2001 and 2003, when the Republicans promised that large tax breaks for the best off in America would result in an extraordinary growth in jobs. In fact, the stock market went down, and it ushered in the deepest recession in December 2007 that I've experienced in my lifetime, and that anybody in this room has experienced in their lifetime. Our policy has been, continues to be, to have a fair tax policy. We need tax reform. Heard that Dave Camp, who offered a reasonable, thoughtful bill making the tough choices that had to be made, couldn't get his own bill. This is the Republican chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, couldn't get his own bill to the floor. Not necessarily to be passed, but at least to be discussed, debated, amended, and considered. We need tax reform to grow the economy, to make us ensure that we are more competitive. The President said that in a couple of his States of the Union address. Secondly, it is, in a recent poll, a significant percentage of the American public was not sure there was an election on November 4th. What I'm arguing is elections make a difference and need people to come out to the polls. My proposition, one of the reasons that Republicans around the country are trying to make it more and more difficult for people to vote is because their premise, which is accurate in my opinion, if everybody votes, Democrats win. And I would urge every American to set aside a time to come to the polls. In Maryland, they can come to the poll for 7 days before November 4th, the 23rd through the 30th. And I would urge them to do so. If they want their voice heard in the Congress of the United States, if they want to make sure that a Republican leadership does not refuse to bring to the floor of the House of Representatives that which clearly mirrors the will of the American people, they need to go to the polls and vote. We celebrate next year, we recognize next year the 50th anniversary of the John Lewis March across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which he marched simply to register to vote in Montgomery, from Selma to Montgomery. He was beaten, as were others in that line of marchers. Shortly thereafter, we passed the Voting Rights Act. But the Voting Rights Act simply says you have the opportunity. You must seize that opportunity if you're going to make a difference.
Ruth, we'll go over to this side of the room. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric P. Hannon with the Fiscal Times. Steny, the administration has talked a lot about the need for the war on ISIS, but there's been very little discussion about the potential cost to the government and taxpayers of this. What is your take on the likely impact of a long-term battle, and what would that do to the Democrats' agenda for change and helping the middle class?
Well, I think we have to look at that honestly. I think we need to have, unlike Iraq, where the administration projected less than $100 billion in cost. It's been over $1 trillion in cost. General Shinseki pointed out it was going to be a lot more. I think we need to have very careful hearings and realistic assessment of the costs of doing what the President and the American people think need to be done, and that's prohibiting ISIL from terrorizing not only its own region, but posing a national security threat to ourselves. We need an honest assessment of that. We have not done that at this point in time, but I would hope that we would and would urge that we do it, not with rose-colored glasses, but realistically, given our past experience.
What about the agenda
for the economy?
Yeah.
I think growing the economy and defeating terrorism are not mutually exclusive. I think America can do both and must do both. We need to grow the economy. If we're going to be strong, we need to create jobs for our people. If they're going to feel confident that America is going to be the country they want it to be, and they're going to have the security they want. So I think we can do both. I think we ought to do both. We're the richest country on the face of the earth, and we're also the strongest. If we have the will and we come together and work together, we can accomplish those dual objectives.
Why don't we take one in the back there, and then we'll move back over this way.
Hi, I'm Cindy Sain with the Voice of America. With Americans very concerned about terrorism, what role do you think foreign policy will play in these upcoming elections, and do you think it could possibly even be a game changer?
Well, I certainly think that foreign policy is more discussed today than it was 6 months ago. I think the threat of ISIL and the takeover of the Crimea illegally by Putin and Russia, the threat in Ukraine, and the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran, and the chaos, if you will, in the Middle East have all elevated foreign policy as a consideration. However, I believe that the American people are still very focused on the economy, on their future of them and their families, and I think they have more confidence today than they had 6 years ago. when President Obama took office, but I still think it's a major concern. But there is no doubt that foreign policy and the threat of ISIL, posed by ISIL, by Russia in Ukraine, and a nuclear-armed Iran, raised the focus. Of course, today, as you know, the President's meeting is today or tomorrow with the new Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, and I think that they're going to have significant discussions about the partnership that India, the largest democracy in the world, and the United States of America, the oldest democracy in the world, can play in the global picture. And I think the fact that that is occurring at this point in time, India has its own concern about terrorism. I think points out the relevance of your question, that foreign policy is going to be a significant concern. But my own view is the continuing economic concerns, and as I posited today, the lack of effectiveness or willingness of the present majority in the House of Representatives to bring to the floor and to consider the agenda of the American people will be, hopefully, and I think, a major consideration.
Right.
Billy House, National Journal. How are you? I know you're not conceding anything in terms of the midterms, but the growth areas for the Republicans appear to be swing state seats: New York, Illinois, California. How would Republicans winning those seats, do you think, change the way that conference operates, with concern about 2016 losing those seats?
Well, Mr. Boehner seemed to be pretty optimistic in his discussion over the weekend, but I'm not sure that those seats would change the very hard line that is in control of the Republican Party. After all, it's not only the seats that control in the Republican Party, it's the Club for Growth, Heritage Action, the Koch brothers, and others whose vast contributions of money have had a real impact on the Republican Party, not only the 45 or 50 or 60 hardliners in the Republican conference. After all, had Boehner been willing to walk away from that group, as I pointed out on numerous occasions, when he was willing, we passed significant bipartisan legislation. He's been unwilling to do that. So whether or not, notwithstanding the fact that I think the majority of his caucus do not fall in that very hardline segment of their group.
Hi, Luca Gattoni-Celli. I read for tax notes, so this will be a Ways and Means Committee question.
Right.
One of the challenges that your caucus has faced on that committee in the last year and a half or so has been focus on tax reform by the chairman to the exclusion of a lot of other policy areas, even within the context of tax. So with a new chairman coming in and the potential for bills outside of tax reform moving, how do you think your caucus, even if it were just to remain in the minority, could have more influence on tax policy in the House?
Well, I'm not sure who the new chairman is going to be. Of course, I quoted Atlas Shrugged. One is right, one is wrong, and the middle is evil. If, in fact, committees operate that way and the Congress acts that way, we will continue to be confronted with gridlock. After all, as I pointed out, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee worked in a bipartisan fashion, as I think you know, including Democrats and Republicans in discussions of various aspects of the tax code. Now, it wasn't a bipartisan bill that he presented, but from our perspective, and you heard, I think, the President say this, you certainly heard Leader Pelosi and I say it, was that he presented a bill, an honest bill. What do I mean by that? He made the trade-offs. However, the Speaker's response to a real bill making real trade-offs was blah, 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 blah. In response to the question, what are you going to do about that bill? Completely dismissing it. What did they bring to the floor? They brought to the floor bills which would create almost $1 trillion in additional debt, and not paid for any of it. Some of those we were for, some we were against, but we pointed out that you're going to explode the deficit one more time, as you did in 2001 and 2003 on your tax cuts, which you did not pay for. So the answer to the question is we need tax reform. I think there is a bipartisan consensus that we need tax reform. And in order to get tax reform, the only way you get it, which is what we did in 1986, is in a bipartisan way, where Republicans in the Congress and Democrats in the Congress and a Republican president, Ronald Reagan, work together with significant help from others in the Reagan administration and achieve tax reform. That's what we've got to do. That's what we will try to do, and I think we can do when the Democrats are elected and we have new leadership on the Ways and Means Committee on the side of somebody who believes that working together is, in fact, what you need to do.
Peter Sun with Capital Intel. Sometimes the lame duck session is used to approve free trade agreements, bilaterals. Is there any plans on this lame duck?
I don't think so. Republican leadership has not mentioned it at all, and I doubt that it will come up either the Pacific or the European. I doubt that they will come up.
SBS international media from Korea. From the standpoint of House Pro, what is the prospect of the Senate elections? Could the Democrats secure the majority?
Well, we have the majority, and the question is, can we keep the majority? I understand that. And the answer is yes. There's a long analysis in the second page of the Washington Post today about 13 districts. I believe that the Senate Democrats will hold their majority. There's an interesting race going on in Kansas, as you know, or you may know. But I think when you look at those 13 races, I think that Democrats can win sufficient numbers of seats so that we will have over 50 members of the United States Senate, and we will keep the Senate, in my view.
We'll stay over on that side, Ruth, for a few minutes. Go ahead.
Hi, Andrea Wolf with Girls Inc. I've noticed, as I'm sure everybody else has, that both parties are strongly discussing the women's vote. How do you feel that the women's vote is going to affect this election, and how do you view Republicans' approach to trying to capture the women's vote, which has historically gone to Democrats?
I'm not sure the women's vote has historically gone to the Republicans. I don't necessarily.
No, it's Democrats. It's Democrats.
Yes. Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's historically, the more women that come out, the more Democrats who win. So
right.
How do you view, but the Republicans have obviously been capitalizing on that and trying to attract more to their camp.
Well, I think they're trying to accomplish more. The problem is they've got such a record of opposing issues of real importance to women, to families, to children. And I think those, all those issues motivate women and men, but women in particular, who are very focused on their families, very focused on their children, very focused on how women are treated, whether they get equal pay. Republicans have refused to bring that to the floor. Millions of women trying to support themselves, living on the minimum wage. The minimum wage is lower today by about 45% than it was in 1968. The last time we raised the minimum wage was when we took back the House. We need to raise the minimum wage. We need to provide for affordable child care. So I think that women, when they come out to vote, will look at the records. It's not about talking about being for women. You've got to act and vote to do that. So that I think there is no doubt that women vote in significant majorities for Democrats, and I would urge them, as I've urged everybody in this speech, to come out and express their voice so that their issues will in fact be brought to the floor of the House of Representatives for consideration. Right now, they're shut out and shut down.
Thank you.
And right there.
Hi, I'm Mary Berger with Washington Trade Daily.
Hi, Mary Berger.
Hi. I wanted to follow up on the question about trade and ask you if you've heard anything about the possibility of Trade Promotional Authority coming up in the lame duck. And then on the U.S. Export-Import Bank, which you mentioned in your speech, what's your strategy for getting a long-term reauthorization next year?
Well, we as you know, Mr. Cantor and I, for 3 or 4 months in a bipartisan, one of the few issues in the last Congress that we did in a bipartisan way, Mr. Cantor and I worked on. We brought that bill to the floor, and every Democrat voted for it. 93 Republicans voted against it. And Republicans in this Congress have refused to bring it to the floor, notwithstanding my urging. I talked about certainty in my speech, where the Republicans said one of the things they wanted to bring to the Congress was certainty. Mr. Hensling is very much opposed to the Export-Import Bank. We believe it has a very positive effect on job creation, and it makes money for the Treasury. The irony is the party that wants to balance the budget rejects a mechanism that makes money for the Treasury. My expectations are that, and I've urged the business community, large, medium, and small, who are affected by the Export-Import Bank, who are facilitated in the creation of jobs and selling products by the operations of the Export-Import Bank, to engage Democrats and Republicans on this issue. My own view is that if that bill were brought to the floor, it's another instance where not bringing a bill to the floor precludes its consideration of the will of the people transparently, which is, of course, what Mr. Boehner and the Young Guns said they were going to do. If that bill had been brought to the floor, 41 Republicans wrote a letter to the Speaker saying, we're for a permanent reauthorization or a long-term, 5-year, reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank. It was never brought to the floor. What we now have is extension to June 30th, as you know. That gives uncertainty to lenders, to borrowers, and to purchasers from across the oceans of American products as to whether or not that assistance is going to be there in the future. So the question, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work hard to see it reauthorized as soon as possible to give certainty to all of those entities in the near term. TPA, I think TPA was incorporated in your answer, and in your question, and I think it's essentially my response. I don't think right now there is the consensus in either party to bring that forward. As you know, I have been historically a very strong supporter and continue to be.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Mr. Hoyer. I'm Dara Baldwin. I'm from the National Disability Rights Network. And my question, I know the answer already because I know how you feel, but I want to put it out there, is in reference to the voting block of people with disabilities. You're right, Mr. Lewis, and people of color got that right. People with disabilities are still barred and have barriers. People who are in institutions can't vote, and also not having ballots, in Braille, not being able to register to vote, not all of those things. And where do you see those people, and what are your plans to help in that voting rights
One of the
block?
things I mentioned to you is the Voting Rights Act to facilitate people voting. This democracy is better the more inclusive it is. The more people that speak, i.e. vote, the better America will be. And to the extent that we facilitate all people voting, America will be better. And certainly as the sponsor of the Americans with Disabilities Act, as a co-sponsor of the Amendments Act, I believe very strongly that we need to adopt reasonable accommodations in the language of the Disabilities Act, which facilitate people with disabilities voting, either access to polls, Braille ballots, other ways to communicate the choices with maintaining the secrecy of the ballot for those with disabilities, we need to do. And I will continue to work on that. And we need to pass a Voting Rights Act response to Shelby versus Holder, which adopted a premise that is not true, that somehow things have changed to they no longer need the protections that were included in the Voting Rights Act, passed overwhelmingly in 2006 by Republicans and Democrats and signed by George Bush.
The announcement that you were going to be speaking and taking part in Newsmaker generated a number of questions from outside of the press club, from members who are not living in Washington, and I would just like to intersperse a few. The crowning achievement of the last Democratic Congress, I think you would agree, was Obamacare. How do you think it has turned out so far, and what impact, if any, will it have on the midterm elections?
The Affordable Care Act, as I call it, the President points out correctly that it will be, the Republicans will call it Obamacare right up until the time that it is widely perceived as working well. Then they'll call it the Affordable Care Act. I think the Affordable Care Act is working. Like any large piece of legislation, it was difficult to implement, continues to pose a challenge. We're just recently into it. However, millions and millions and millions of people now have access to affordable quality health care. Millions of people are not shut out because of pre-existing conditions. Being a woman is not treated as a pre-existing condition under the Affordable Care Act. In fact, we've seen stories which indicate that premiums are coming down, that competition is up, and we now have a marketplace. The irony is that it was perceived as somehow a socialist system. These are all private sector providers. All we've created is a market to which consumers can go and compare comparative shopping. That's what the free market is all about. So I think at worst, the Affordable Care Act is going to be a neutral, and in my opinion, mostly a positive. And certainly as the years go by, it will become a more positive aspect of American life. Because more and more and more Americans will have access to affordable quality health care, which they need, which they want, and which I think increasingly they see the Affordable Care Act as accomplishing.
This is your 33rd year in Congress, and I wonder if, from that perspective, I'd just like to ask another question that we received. But this year has featured one government, if you like, screw-up after another, from the VA scandal to the IRS scandal to the intelligence failures that made the growth of ISIS seem like a surprise. Given all that, how much faith should the American people have in their federal government?
Well, I think, as I've said, we need to restore the faith that has been shaken by the unwillingness of the Congress of the United States, the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives in particular, to consider the issues that the American people feel are important, and by polling data, overwhelmingly support. And I think if the Congress were working, the trust level would be substantially heightened. Now, we have some real challenges. And when, frankly, things don't work correctly, Democrats came out very strongly with reference to the VA issues, with respect to the altering of statistics in terms of veterans' waiting times. All of us were very angry about that, and the President has put in a new leader who is making very substantial reforms to make it work as well as veterans deserve, which means making sure they have access to the VA healthcare system in a timely basis, which provides them very good health service, which they agree it provides them. It's getting to it. On the IRS, I think the hearings that have been held on that pretty clearly indicate this was not at the direction of the administration. It was corrected at some point in time, but not timely enough. And Democrats have made it very, very clear that what happened, or what appeared to have happened, is unacceptable. No American, whatever their views, whatever their party, whatever status they find themselves in, politically or otherwise, should have their tax issues related to any of those facets other than what they legitimately owe as taxes, period.
I know you feel strongly and confident that the Democrats will retain control of the Senate, but nevertheless, I would like to ask, how would things change for the House Democrats if the Republicans were in control of the Senate? And how would things change for President Obama if the Republicans were to gain control of the Senate?
Well, I think we'd see exactly what the American public abhor. More gridlock, more confrontation, more partisanship. They all indicate they don't want any of that. So that my urging to the American people would be elect people who are going to work with, cooperate with the President of the United States. That does not mean agree on every issue. We are a separate and co-equal branch of the government of the United States. We need to reflect a thoughtful consideration of the President's proposals and propose to the President. We are, after all, the Article I branch of government that proposes policy. The executive carries out policy. And that's the context in which we ought to operate. But having said that, I think the American people made it very clear they think the obstructionism is largely the responsibility of the Republican Party. Thomas Mann and Norm Ornstein, one with the Brookings Institution, one with the American Enterprise Institute, wrote a book. And essentially the theme of their book was there is gridlock, there's confrontation, there is a refusal to compromise. And while they say they've criticized Republicans in the past and Democrats in the past, at this point in time, their only conclusion is the responsibility of the Republicans both in the House and in the Senate, which have led to this confrontation, refusal to compromise. Remember, Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand said, compromising or the middle is evil. If you believe that, if you believe it is simply my way or the highway, or my way or no way, then you will get the gridlock and confrontation that people hate. So my proposition to the American people in this speech and when I go any place in the country is, if you don't like what's going on, elect a party that will work with the President to create a better economy and a more secure country.
Congressman Hoyer, I thought that it would be too partisan if we were to exchange mementos representing our respective universities, Ohio State and the University of Maryland. And so I chose a more professional, neutral memento to present to you, the traditional National Press Club mug. And we thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much.
Good luck on Saturday.
Okay, good. Thanks a lot. And he wished me good luck on Saturday. But he had
I have to be
polite.
They were crossed.
Either Ohio State or Maryland evil, as you say.